Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. This is Mr. Johnson Teaches A Christmas Carol, an introduction to the context. A video just getting you started or maybe recapping some of the basics, the very basics of the context of this novel, setting in its scene and helping you towards your GCSE exams. You'll find A Christmas Carol on paper 1, section B of your literature. Your GCSE English literature is one of the first exams that you sit for your literature. Be ready to make notes as we go through this as well. That's really important. Watching this video is a step in the right direction, but actually having some notes that you can refer back to are even more important. So be ready to pause this video or rewatch it, and there's a little quiz at the end for you. Okay, let's move on then. And just remind you that this is AO3 context that we're talking about here. So this is something that you are marked for when you are writing a response to the question in your GCSE. And as I've put on the left hand or the right hand side, excuse me, there is the circumstances that form the setting around a text. So for example, I've put there, a context for A Christmas Carol includes like the idea of poverty in society, the need for rich supporting the poor, a time of massive change, leaving some of those in very tricky circumstances. This was the world that A Christmas Carol was written in. So Charles Dickens was affected by these things, and therefore it's important for you to know that when you're reading the book, that actually it is referring to the time period in which it was written. So let's have a look at that then. Here he is, Charles Dickens. I'll be doing another video on Charles Dickens in more detail, but in summary for you then, the writer of the book, well, he is one of Britain's most famous writers of novels. But not only that, he was a writer of short stories, he wrote articles, letters, and he was also a publisher of these things himself as well. He also was a real performer. He loved to read aloud, and he would have hundreds and thousands of people go to his performances where he would read and perform extracts from his books. And he also went on tour in the United States as well, which at this time was certainly a big thing to travel across the ocean by ship and so forth. His works really explored people, I've put there, and society, and the whole Victorian era when he was writing. He was a very keen observer and really noted these things. Some of his book titles in the middle there, you've got Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, David Copperfield, are some of his works, but there were many, many more of these too. And why is he still studied today, you may wonder? Well, he's studied because his works really examine our humanity, what it is to be human, and also morality, looking at what is right and what is wrong, and trying to steer us towards making those right decisions. As I say, definitely worth checking out another video on my channel, which is going to be in more depth about Charles Dickens, just to help you really get some good AO3 marks. So, let's set the scene for you then. A Christmas Carol comes from the Victorian era. So we're talking 1837 was the start of that era when Queen Victoria came to the throne, and it ran right up into 1901. So during those 60-something years, there really was enormous change taking place in the country. The picture there illustrates it a little bit for you, but this was a time where you saw different changes in population size, in what people were doing for work, and also the difference between rich and poor certainly grew at this time. So the Industrial Revolution is the first thing we really need to think about here for the Victorian era. It's a name given to a time of enormous change where we had our country shifting from manual labour and people sort of doing a lot of things by hand, many people working in agriculture, so we're talking farming in the fields, working probably in their villages, small productions, things being done by hand, and the gradual inventions of machinery, which was able to speed up this process and do things much more quickly and create vast quantities of things. These machines, these factories were established generally in your bigger cities, so places like London, Birmingham, Manchester, they grew enormously during this era because people, the factory owners needed people, there were more people in the cities, but because jobs were being created, you saw people moving from the countryside towards the cities. And at the bottom there I put, so Britain started to shift from agriculture to a country of production. But this also meant some really cruel conditions, something else I will look at again in future videos on my channel, but you can see like the picture there illustrating really having children working alongside what was very dangerous machinery, and they were working very hard hours for very little money. But the Industrial Revolution, a real key influencer over this era, the Victorian era. And as I've put on the side there, the Industrial Revolution led to this rapid growth. So people moving into the cities, they needed somewhere to live, which meant there was enormous population growth because there were more people around, and therefore this led to overpopulation. Quite simply, there wasn't enough housing for these people. So this is a time where it would be really typical to find generations living in one room. So we're talking like the kids, the parents and the grandparents often sharing one room, one space, which was where all their cooking was done, where the living was done, and where the sleeping was done as well. The conditions were very, very poor. The housing was thrown up quickly. There was a need for housing, so housing was being built, but it was being built on land which just wasn't appropriate. It was being squeezed on as well, built very cheaply, so these people could make maximum money out of these people. In short, it led to the creation of slums, basically slum living in London, but also other cities as well. And it just meant the conditions were really, really poor. So health really suffered, as well as the pollution that was being caused at this time. So that's something to bear in mind, the context of this, and we certainly see that through the Cratchit family, who you hopefully might have read about already if you've studied the novel already, or if you haven't. It's a family which almost represents and gives a face to this poverty. And what happened to the very poorest then? So those who were unable to work for any reasons. Well, there was something called the New Poor Law. It replaced a series of poor laws which had been in existence for hundreds of years in the country. The New Poor Law was created to try and deal with the increasing poverty that was present in our country. And part of it saw the creation of what were called workhouses, where the poorest, able-bodied, so people who were physically able to work, they were able-bodied, they could be set to work and they could earn themselves food and clothing in order to try and prevent them being poor. These workhouses were enormous buildings set up where basically the people would do all sorts of very hard jobs, or very, very sort of physical jobs, and they weren't being paid for it. So the idea was that the people who owned the workhouses could make money from it, and the people who were poorest could actually earn themselves food and earn themselves clothing. But as you might imagine, the people owning these workhouses and running these workhouses wanted to make as much as they could. Therefore, the clothing was often very poor, but obviously the food was particularly bad as well. And to discourage people, you didn't want everybody going into these workhouses. You wanted people to go out working for themselves. So to discourage these people, they were set up in a way to make them feared, like the food being horrible, like the conditions being really bleak and terrible. And gradually you actually saw a shift where they became places for older people started to end up in these workhouses, old people who had nowhere else to go, who weren't able to be working themselves. And the disabled, again, there was no sort of system of benefits for these disabled people. So the workhouses really were a place that you wanted to avoid at all costs. And then to turn it round a little bit, so let's think about the rich in society as well, because although there were more poor people and people struggling, there were a number of rich people too. So what about them? Well, there was a split. Not all rich people were the same. Bullet point number 2 there, some took social responsibility. They actually were able to, could see that they could support others, and therefore did. They were philanthropic, is the bold word there, a really good word to get into your head and write down. And you can look it up yourself after watching this video, but I will tell you, philanthropic is to support and to give money to charity or to help others through use of money. People like Dr. Bernardo, he was a man who saw the workhouses and saw orphans ending up there, and actually set up the first series of children's homes in this country to actually directly support those. Bernardo's is a charity which still exists today. Or you also have people like George Cadbury, the owner of Cadbury's, the chocolate producers. The top right picture you see there, Cadbury actually set up a village and created housing for his workers, high quality housing. The picture there is of a public swimming pool, public baths as they were known, where all his workers, so he wanted to have healthy workers, they had outdoor spaces in order to make them better workers and therefore to make him more profit. So some people saw a way of working which was very different to maybe the stereotypical one that we might think of naturally. It's worth saying that not all were cruel and just driven purely by profit. Philanthropy and philanthropic people existed. However, there were the others as well. Others who saw the poorest in society as idlers. So somebody who is idle is basically lazy and doesn't work. The word idler and idle does come up in the novel Christmas Carol as well. And they were seen as idlers, and therefore those owners wanted to just maximise their own profits. And you can see that how that maybe links to Scrooge and his attitude throughout the novel, certainly at the start as well. And that's what my bottom picture was trying to represent really there as well. If you could work, you should work, and it's up to you to find a job which pays. You have to be satisfied with what you're given. There are some quick recap questions then, because that is hopefully a very quick video, just trying to capture the very basics of the context. Do check out my other videos. Do go around the internet yourself and have a browse around. Use revision guides and that. Understanding the context of this novel really can make a difference to how you answer questions, and you're able to link your ideas of the context back to why Charles Dickens wrote the novel in such a way. So I wish you the very best of luck when it comes to your exams and writing about A Christmas Carol. Thanks for watching this video, and I wish you good luck. Goodbye.